Essentially, the due on sale clause does not obligate the lender to call the note due. It only gives the lender an option to accelerate the note and call the note due. Because of this distinction, this is not a breach of the contract. It's simply triggering a clause which now gives one party, namely the lender, a new right, a new option, a new thing that they can do now that the other party did this other thing, right? So if party A does this, well then party B can do this. It's not saying party A cannot do this, and if it does do this, well then it's in breach and violation of the contract and is committing fraud. That's not what that due on sale clause that we just read said. It's far from it. Hey folks, and welcome back to Sub2 Investor. In this episode, I want to dissect in detail a video that was recently released from a popular Airbnb investor and influencer. And in this video, he makes some massive claims alleging that not only is Sub2 illegal doing these deals, but if you make it a matter of your regular business practice to do Sub2 deals, that actually what you're doing is engaging in a conspiracy to commit fraud against these banks and lenders with these homeowners who are selling you their properties subject to, and that mortgage companies are cracking down. The due on sale clause is becoming a real issue for the Sub2 industry. And if you engage in creative finance, particularly buying Sub2, you're going to be in deep doo-doo in the court of law because what you're doing is extremely illegal and destructive to people's lives. So we're going to break down this video. We're going to analyze his claims, and I'm going to give you my opinion. Stay tuned. Well, if that's not a teaser, I'm not sure what is. Obviously, if what this fellow is saying is true, then we need to take it very, very seriously. Let me start off by saying I'm not an attorney. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a law professional. Definitely seek your own legal counsel on all of these issues, everything we talk about, because this is not legal advice. Let's begin by showing you the video. Now, this guy, he owns a lot of Airbnb properties, and he's a successful real estate investor. I have a great amount of respect for this guy. Obviously, he's been successful in the business that he's chosen to have and to build, and so that's fantastic. But he's stepping on a few toes on this video. He knows he's stepping on a few toes, but I'm going to come back here and just tell him and, well, this audience who might have seen that video or is hearing similar things and are simply confused. They're confused. Like, I thought Sub2 was legal to do. I've been told that by X and Y and Z people, but now this guy's saying not only is it illegal, it's like extremely fraudulent and you could be criminally prosecuted for doing it. So what is the truth? I do not want to add to the confusion. I got nothing to sell you in this video. I'm just trying to offer free and valuable content from a somewhat reasonably expert opinion, I guess you could say, somebody who's done a decent amount of Sub2 deals and has studied it in quite a bit of depth. Let me show you the video.
Comments if you want to get it off your chest. But then herein lies the argument of fraud. A novice, somebody who has no clue what they're doing, who comes up with the idea of buying a property and the seller doesn't want to let go of their mortgage because they don't want to have to get a higher interest rate mortgage. If in some private conversation they said, here's a cool idea, why don't I just make your mortgage payments? In an innocent scenario, that would not be fraud. Because the buyer's not aware of how mortgages work yet because he's a novice and he doesn't know that the seller is obligated to declare that he sold the property. Now, the seller, initially buying the property for a different reason, did not buy the property to subject to. So if he happens to do a subject to later, he did not commit criminal fraud. He's only committed a civil violation that can call the mortgage due. Because in order for it to be criminal, he had to have the intention of defrauding the lender while executing the contract. This is the very small window in which subject to is not fraud. But because of YouTube, people like myself who teach for free, other creators that specifically teach subject to, there are people who now no longer have the argument that they're a novice. People who buy courses on subject to and full-time actively prospect for properties for subject to are what we would call sophisticated actors. And if a mortgage company or anyone else ever wanted to target one of these career buyers, they could make the claim that this person knows what they're doing and they're committing conspiracy to commit fraud by actively looking for sellers that are willing to do subject to. So the seller, in almost every imaginable scenario right now, is committing conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud. And that's reason number 2. You can do up to 30 years in jail for fraud. And if the seller is aware that he has to notify the lender, which he is aware, and he, under the advisement of the buyer, decides to forego telling the lender and actively attempts to conceal from the lender that he sold the property, like keeping insurances in the same name, keeping bills in the same name, transferring a property into a trust, or any other nominee structure, that is fraudulent concealment. And fraudulent concealment is mortgage fraud. This also depends on the state. So now not only is the buyer committing conspiracy to commit fraud and then fraudulent concealment, but then the seller also committed fraudulent concealment and fraud. And what's even crazier is that the influencers that you may be listening to about Subject 2 right now are also implicated in the same fraud. If they teach their students that they can structure a deal to bypass a lender without the lender knowing that they made the purchase, so that way they can at scale buy multiple properties under Subject 2, the educator is committing conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud. And he's facilitating it at a large scale. And if there's international transactions where he's teaching people to do this, this could even be considered wire fraud. Anytime that you commit fraud where transactions go between states, like your bank is in Texas, you bought a property in Colorado, and you're making fraudulent mortgage payments, that could also be wire fraud. Every time you make a payment is a new count of wire fraud. But it doesn't end there. That was only 2 of the 3 reasons that you are in hella trouble if you try to commit Subject 2 in 2025 or 2026. If you find this interesting, please like the video and share with your friends. I'd like to keep you out of jail.
Oh goodness, man, I'm glad I got kept out of jail in that video. Man, that's so interesting. Very interesting. I can't help but think that a video like that is bound to get a lot of views, right? It's bound to get a lot of views because that's a pretty big claim. But let's dissect what he's talking about. So first of all, is Subject 2 illegal? Like, what is the deal? I thought everybody was saying it was legal. Let me ask this question. Why does it show up Subject 2, first of all, on the HUD-1 settlement statement? Let me show you. All right, I do want to get to his specific claims here, but first of all, for some context, for some general education purposes, we're looking at a HUD-1 settlement statement from the federal government, their settlement statements. And down here on line 203, there's a line for existing loans taken Subject 2. On the seller's side, there's a mirror line item for existing loans taken Subject 2. That's lines 203 and 503. Memorize that in the event that you're ever having a discussion with an agent or a seller and you want to bring this case up, that the HUD-1 federal government settlement statement has line items for the event of taking a mortgage Subject 2. Now, since this is an illegal activity, allegedly, it's pretty interesting that the federal government would just be okay putting it on here, especially given the fact that, as this gentleman says, virtually all mortgages these days have a due on sale clause. So is the federal government aiding and abetting my supposed fraud by buying a property Subject 2, by just giving me these line items to place the mortgages I'm taking over Subject 2 on their settlement statement? That's one whammy, but this is actually a double whammy. Not only does the HUD-1 have a line item for Subject 2 transactions, but did you know that the standard closing disclosure, the CD that mortgage companies use when they're issuing a loan, also have line items for buying a property Subject 2. So on your CD, this is standard course for getting a loan. You're going to be issued a loan estimate and then a closing disclosure that looks very much like this thing right here that I'm looking at. But look down here at the sections L and N. L and N here on page 3 also have line items for existing loans assumed or taken Subject 2 here on the buyer side and then here on the seller side as well. So not only does the HUD-1 have it, but the closing disclosure has it as well. Now, again, I am no attorney or legal expert, but if virtually all mortgages have a due on sale clause, then why even put this option out there for people? If you do a subject to deal, you're doing a fraudulent illegal activity. Why even enable people to commit a crime by buying a house subject to, by friggin' putting it on the HUD-1 and the standard closing disclosure that all lenders use to disclose the terms of a loan? Excuse me for my passion and my energy in this video. I care a lot about this topic, obviously. Now, I also want to point out that in the description of this gentleman's YouTube video, the very first link when I came across this video, and I don't know if it'll still be there after the fact, is a link to a Reddit thread, which supposedly he says, here are real subject to horror stories. And then click on the Reddit link. It brings you to this page right here. And I read through this whole thread. There's only one horror story of subject to on this entire thread here. And this isn't even a due on sale horror story. This isn't even a, oh crap, I did a Sub2 deal and now I'm getting sued for doing it horror story. Nope. This story right here that he's referring to in that very first link in the YouTube description is a seller who sold their property subject to, well, there's the question, and here's the horror story. This seller sold their property subject to, let's just see what they say. Let's read it here for a second, okay? A subject to transaction. Now, this is on Reddit. This is a public website here. With me being the seller has ruined the last year of my life. The subject to transaction has ruined the last year of my life with no way out. Will probably do the same for the next 28 years. I cannot buy a home, much less secure a small loan. The buyer evicted the tenants without any warning. I have been asking for any way to come to an agreement with the investor / buyer for me to recoup my home or reoccupy my home due to coming back to my home state to care for my mother suffering from cancer, dementia, and kidney failure. I asked for any arrangement would be greatly appreciated. I was continually told that tenants would be out soon and he would be in contact. 9 months later, tenants had to be out by 7 today. My house was sold on courthouse steps today after I did everything anyone told me to do. I'm currently sleeping on my mother's couch. I quit my job to move back, so no money. DTI is through the roof. Okay, guys, I'm not exactly sure what this situation is. I don't know this person. I have no details of the transaction, so take my words with a grain of salt. But what this appears to be is just an investor who didn't do a good job doing a subject to deal. They were not clear and transparent and honest in their conversation with the seller. And if it's true that the house did get foreclosed on and they weren't making the mortgage payments, then shame on that investor, because the number one rule of doing Sub2 is you make that dang payment every single month, no matter what. And if that's not your MO, then don't do Sub2. Get out of the game. So this Reddit thread is literally just, that's the only horror story, guys. That's it. You can read through the rest of the comments, and I saw nothing else, no other horror stories. Just one seller who did a bad deal with a subpar wholesaler or investor. That's some background information, and we've kind of looked at some of the sources he cited. It doesn't appear to be the most thorough job so far that I've seen. These are some pretty extravagant claims, so let's just dig into these claims a little bit more detail. And since this gentleman is using ChatGPT to construct sort of his legal case, let's go ahead and use AI as well. Let's go ahead and use Grok to ask artificial intelligence whether or not doing subject to can be construed as conspiring to commit fraud with a homeowner, especially if you're an investor who does this on the regular. Well, let's make sure we understand the claim, right? So conspiracy to commit fraud implies an agreement between two or more parties to intentionally deceive or defraud another, in this case, a lender, for financial gain, with overt acts to further that agreement. The influencer's claim suggests that investors systematically target sellers for subject to deals. They're inherently engaging in deceptive practices, presumably by concealing property transfers from lenders to exploit mortgage terms. That's a summary of the arguments, and we got to make sure we got that argument more or less correct there. Now, Grok disagrees with the influencer. He thinks that this is not an accurate claim. What Grok says is that subject to deals where a buyer takes over a seller's mortgage payments without formally assuming the loan are a legitimate real estate investment strategy when executed transparently and legally. Now, I just gave you guys some fodder or some evidence or some sort of proof that this is a legitimate investment strategy by pointing you to the HUD-1 and the closing disclosure. Actively seeking sellers willing to do subject to deals does not automatically constitute fraud or conspiracy for the following reasons. Let's see what those reasons are. Number one, no inherent deception. A subject to deal involves transferring property title while the original mortgage remains in the seller's name. This does not require misrepresenting facts to the lender, as no new loan is originated and the buyer simply makes payments on the existing mortgage. Actively seeking sellers is a standard business practice in real estate investing, similar to targeting properties for flips and wholesaling. Marketing to motivated sellers doesn't equate to fraud, right, unless deceptive tactics are used. So it's important here just to note that when we do subject to deals, we don't misrepresent any facts. We're not lying in any way. We are not concealing any information that we're obligated to provide. And I think that's actually kind of the rub, which I'm going to get to that in just one second. Let's continue on with what Grok says here. Due on sale clause is not fraud. Most mortgages have a due on sale clause. That is correct. Allowing lenders to demand full repayments if the property is transferred without consent. Now, I'm going to give this guy a lot of credit because he actually has a pretty sophisticated understanding of how subject to deals are structured, especially among the sophisticated Sub2 investors who use land trusts. They structure insurance properly. They understand the role of the trustee, the beneficiary, all this kind of thing. So he's got all that correct, and he has a solid grasp on the concept. Yes, it's true that most mortgages have due on sale clause. However, transferring a property subject to does not violate this clause. And this is like so fundamental. This is not talked about as frequently as it really should be. I'm going to camp on this here for a minute. Let me repeat that. Transferring a property subject to does not violate this clause. It only triggers the lender's right to enforce that due on sales. Yeah, the lender has a right to enforce the clause, but it does not violate the clause. I'm going to, again, come back to that in just a second here. Let me finish. Lenders rarely call loans due if payments are made on time, as their primary interest is receiving payments. Now, this is an interesting thought here because I was just speaking to an attorney about a totally different topic, and he just made a point that, hey, if you have a defaulted buyer and they're behind, but then they start sending you payments and you're accepting those payments over time, you could be construed as sort of waiving that default. You've sort of passively or indirectly reinstated the agreement, and even though you've told them they're in default, since you're accepting the payments, they can make an argument that your actions have shown that you're waiving that default status of this contract for deed. It was something like this, and reading this sentence here just made me think that, wow, from all the information I've gathered on Sub2 over the years, I know that lenders know what's going on. Lenders know that subject to deals are happening all the time. They're very privy to this. Of course they know. They know how to identify a Sub2 transaction in their system, and yet they don't call the notes due. How do I know this? Well, I know this from the mouths of higher ups in mortgage companies, okay? And this is what they say. They know that it's happening and that it's a don't ask, don't tell policy. That's literally what some mortgage companies off the record have said about subject to. If that's the case, well then, hey, they might be waiving their right to enforce any criminal action allegedly against any homeowner or investor buying subject to, right? Do you see the logic with where I'm going? Again, not an attorney, just kind of my random opinion here. Intentionally avoiding lender notification is common in subject to deals. Now, this is what this guy's saying is intentionally concealing information, right? So let's see what Grok has to say. Intentionally avoiding lender notification is common, but it's not inherently fraudulent unless accompanied by active misrepresentation, such as forging documents or lying to the lender about ownership. This is Grok's opinion of the claim that doing a subject to deal is committing fraud against the mortgage company. Let's camp out on this whole topic about the due on sale clause and the lender's rights and obligations / breach of contract, right? Like, this is actually kind of a big topic of conversation here. It's like, as you talk to a seller whose property you're trying to buy subject to, and you're trying to coach them about Sub2 and educate them, and here's the due on sale clause, and here's the trust, here's how it all works, because we do everything transparently. Are you conspiring with them to intentionally conceal information omission or to intentionally breach that contract with the lender. Again, not an attorney here, but what I want to do next is show you a written document from an attorney that I know who highly specializes in subject twos and wrap transactions. And I'm not going to name his name because this is a document he provides to pretty much anybody that's going to do business in his office. So he's not going to mind me sharing this if he ever watches his video, but I just want to show you what this highly qualified attorney who does a lot of subject to transactions has to say about this exact question. Again, I have to apologize for my sort of cocky tone in this video. I get emotional over this topic. Let's check it out. So the section in blue that I highlighted is what I am interested in here. What is a due on sale clause? He says, most real estate loans will have a contract term in the deed of trust in which the borrower agrees to not convey the property without either issuing payment in full for the amount due on the loan or obtaining authority from the lender to convey the property. This is the due on sale clause. The language used in the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac Uniform Deed of Trust, again, federal source here, is as follows. If all or any part of the property or any interest in the property is sold or transferred, or if borrower is not a natural person and a beneficial interest in borrower is sold or transferred, aka what happens when you purchase in a trust, right? This is why you buying in a trust doesn't get you around the due on sale clause if your LLC is the beneficiary. Without lender's prior written consent, lender may require immediate payment in full of all sums secured by the security instrument. This is the due on sale clause. Okay, this is the due on sale clause per Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, their standard deed of trust template for their transactions. There it is right there. So what does this attorney have to say about this? He says that this is not prohibitory language. It says the lender may accelerate the note if it wants to. When an owner transfers a property without consent from the lender, the owner makes it possible for the lender, if the lender chooses so, to accelerate the note. It is not a breach of the deed of trust. It is not fraud. If I understand what he's saying correctly, essentially, the due on sale clause does not obligate the lender to call the note due. It only gives the lender an option to accelerate the note and call the note due. Because of this distinction, this is not a breach of the contract. It's simply triggering a clause which now gives one party, namely the lender, a new right, a new option, a new thing that they can do now that the other party did this other thing, right? So if party A does this, well then party B can do this. It's not saying party A cannot do this, and if it does do this, well then it's in breach and violation of the contract and is committing fraud. That's not what that due on sale clause that we just read said. It's far from it. And it's this very distinction, guys. This is why there's so much disinformation out there, and I had to create a video. When I saw this, I knew that this would be something I'd want to address. It's this kind of detail and attention to detail which is really going to give you confidence to continue doing these kinds of deals and communicating to agents and just having confidence in the business model. If one day things change and due on sale clause get written a different way, or lenders begin exercising this right of due on sale, well then we have a different problem we have to deal with. But as far as I'm aware, all of these claims about mortgage fraud and conspiracy and this and that, I'm just not aware of any subject to investor type person who does a lot of these being sued for this. If that were the case, don't you think that we'd have some hallmark examples of that happening, specifically the way that he's talking about it, right? Now, investors do all sorts of shady, bad things from time to time and need to be held accountable and are held accountable. But from my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, specifically for what he's talking about, violating that due on sale clause and conspiring with a homeowner to violate that due on sale clause, I've never heard of a case being brought against an investor for doing that. This is all theoretical at this point, and again, not legal advice. Go seek legal counsel on your own. But I hope that this video at least sheds some light on my opinion on the matter and kind of give you an alternative perspective, also incorporating some expert advice and opinion, not just my opinion, but opinions that I have gleaned examined and sort of kept record of over the months and years of me doing subject to. I have that document that attorney sent me. I saved that because that's the kind of thing where I will show a real estate agent if I'm trying to buy a house subject to, and they're coming to me with these kinds of objections. That's a document that I can share to overcome that objection. And so knowledge is power. And that's exactly what that document from that attorney that I know, that's why he made it, so that we can go out there and do these transactions and do them correctly, transparently, safely as we possibly can, certainly as legally as we can. And guys, just always do friggin' good business. Be transparent with your sellers, with the agents, with your buyers, with everybody in the transaction, and be true to your word. Just do what you say you're going to do, especially when it comes to Sub2 and being entrusted with that privilege of a low interest rate mortgage. That is a gift, and we want to take that seriously and treat it with respect and just make those payments every month. That's my response to that video. I hope that was helpful. If you like this channel, please subscribe, hit like, and check out the podcast. I'm a little backlogged on uploading all of these episodes, but I am now taking my transcript of these YouTube videos and putting it on a podcast. It's going to take a few months to be brought current, but so that way you can stay up to speed with what I'm doing over the MP3s versus the MP4s. All right, guys, until next time, stay creative. Peace.